slid the folder across the table, and that's when my father-in-law stood up and said the words that changed everything. "Before anyone signs anything," he said, adjusting his cufflinks like he was about to close a business deal, "we need to talk about how this property is going to be structured." I looked at my wife. She was staring at the table. That was the moment I knew, not the moment I admitted it to myself. That would come later, in the parking garage, sitting in my truck with the engine off for 20 minutes. But that was the moment I knew. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start at a closing table. It starts with a question my father-in-law asked me the third time I ever met him. "What do you pull in a year, Marcus?" We were at Sunday dinner. My girlfriend, I'll call her Diane, had warned me her family was direct. Her father, Gerald, owned a mid-sized commercial contracting firm outside of Columbus. Her mother, Patricia, managed the family's investments, a word she used the way other people use the word empire. They had a house in Dublin, Ohio, with a 3-car garage and a kitchen that had been featured in a local magazine. They were not subtle people. "Comfortable," I said. Because I was 29, and I thought that was a clever answer. Gerald looked at me the way a man looks at a used car he's not sure is worth the asking price. "Comfortable doesn't tell me much," he said. "Dad," Diane said, "it's a fair question. He wants to marry into this family. I want to know what he's bringing to the table." I told him, $114,000 a year base, software engineering manager at a logistics company, solid benefits, equity vesting in 2 years. I told him because I was proud of it and because I was 29 and still believed that numbers like that were a kind of armor. Gerald nodded slowly, not impressed. "Cataloging. That's workable," he said, and went back to his steak. I thought about that word for weeks. Workable. Not impressive. Not even good. Workable. Like I was a material being assessed for load-bearing capacity. Diane and I had been together for 2 years by then. I had met her at a project management conference in Cincinnati, of all places. She was there representing her father's company, and I was there because my director had sent me instead of going himself. We ended up at the same hotel bar, both of us annoyed about being there. Both of us drinking whiskey we didn't particularly want. She made me laugh 3 times in the first 10 minutes. By the end of the night, I had her number and a headache I didn't mind at all. She was smart, genuinely funny. And she had this habit of tilting her head slightly when she was listening to you. That made you feel like what you were saying actually mattered. I fell for her fast and I fell for her hard. And I want to be honest about that, because it matters for understanding everything that came after. I was not a naive person. I was not someone who ignored red flags out of laziness. I was someone who loved a woman and told himself the flags were shadows. The second time Gerald asked about my finances, it was 6 months before the wedding. Diane and I had gotten engaged in October. I proposed at a park near our apartment in Westerville. No restaurant, no audience, just the 2 of us and a ring I had spent 3 months picking out. She cried. I cried a little. We called her parents first because she wanted to. The engagement dinner was at their house. Patricia made lamb and talked about the venue they had in mind. Gerald waited until dessert. "Now that you're officially family," he said, setting down his fork, "we should talk about the practical side of things." I thought he meant the wedding budget. I was wrong. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. At the top it said, in clean serif font, "Hartwell Family Financial Agreement." I read it twice. Then I read it again. The short version. Once Diane and I were married, my salary and any bonuses would be deposited into a joint account managed by Gerald and Patricia as trustees. Diane and I would receive a monthly household allowance, the amount left blank, to be determined based on demonstrated need. Any major purchases over $2,000 required trustee approval. The arrangement would remain in place for, and I am quoting directly, as long as the trustees deem appropriate for family stability. I put the paper down. "This is a joke," I said. I genuinely thought it was a joke. Gerald looked at me with an expression that contained no humor whatsoever. "Our family operates as a unit," he said. "That's how we've stayed strong. That's how we've built what we've built. Diane understands this." I looked at Diane. She was looking at her dessert plate. Her jaw was tight. She didn't look at me. "Diane," I said, "we can talk about it later," she said quietly. "No," I said, "I'd like to talk about it now, actually." The table went very still. I said as calmly as I could, that I appreciated the dinner and the welcome into the family, and that I had a great deal of respect for what Gerald and Patricia had built. I said that I intended to be a good partner to their daughter and a responsible adult in every financial sense. And then I said that I would not be signing any agreement that gave another person control over my income, and that I was a little surprised such a document had been prepared without any prior conversation with me. Gerald said that every man who had married into the Hartwell family had signed it. There have been two, Patricia said helpfully. Diane's brother-in-law and her cousin's husband. How's that working out for them? I asked. Silence. I found out later from Diane's aunt that cousin's husband had quietly consulted a divorce attorney twice in 4 years. Diane's brother-in-law, from what I could piece together, had taken a second job he never told the family about just to have money that was actually his. That night, after we got home, Diane and I had the longest conversation we had ever had. She cried. She told me she hated the agreement too. She told me her father had sprung it on her only 3 weeks earlier and she hadn't known how to bring it up. She told me she didn't want her parents controlling our finances. She told me she just needed a little time to manage her family, to get them to ease up, to find a middle ground. I believed her. I want to be clear about that. I believed her completely, and I believe she meant it when she said it. That's the thing about this kind of family. The people who grow up inside them often can't see the walls. They think the ceiling is just the sky. We spent the next 6 months navigating what I thought was a negotiation. Diane had multiple conversations with her parents. Gerald revised the agreement twice. The revisions were cosmetic. The control structure stayed the same. Each time Diane came back to me, she said they were making progress. Each time I read the new version, the substance was identical. I kept working. I kept saving. I found a house, a 3-bedroom in Gahana, about 20 minutes from my office, with a good school district and a backyard that got afternoon sun. I put down an earnest money deposit with my own savings. I showed Diane the listing at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, and she grabbed my arm and said it was perfect. We scheduled the closing for a Thursday in March. I should tell you what happened on the Tuesday before that Thursday, because it is the part of the story I have turned over in my mind more than any other. I came home early. There was a work call I thought was going to run until 6, but wrapped up at 4:30. I parked in the lot of our apartment complex, and I was walking to the elevator when I passed the building's small outdoor courtyard. Diane was sitting on one of the benches. She had her phone to her ear. She was speaking quietly, but the courtyard has this odd acoustic quality. The brick walls catch sound and bounce it back. I heard her say, "He doesn't know about the trust language in the deed, Dad. Don't bring it up until after he signs." I stopped walking. I know. Just tap-click. Let's get through the closing first, and then we can restructure the rest. I stood there on the path for what was probably 10 seconds, but felt considerably longer. Then I walked past up the stairs into the apartment. I sat on the couch without taking off my jacket. I sat there until I heard her key in the lock 40 minutes later. She came in, saw me on the couch, and said, "You're home early." "I am," I said. She made dinner. I ate it. We talked about other things. I was very calm, and I did not tell her what I had heard because I needed time to understand it fully before I decided what to do about it. That night, I called my father. My father is a man who spent 30 years as a civil engineer and has a very specific gift for identifying when a structure is unsound. I told him what I had heard. He asked 3 questions. He said, "Son, what does the title company have on file for the proposed deed?" The next morning, I called the title company myself, framed it as a buyer double-checking documentation before closing. The coordinator read me the vesting language on the prepared deed. It included a provision that would add Gerald and Patricia Hartwell as co-tenants, with right of survivorship and a management clause that mirrored almost word for word the family financial agreement I had already refused to sign. It had been prepared without my knowledge or consent. I sat in my car in the title company parking lot for a while after that call. I thought about what Diane had said on that bench in the courtyard. I thought about 6 months of progress on negotiations that had produced no actual change. I thought about the way she had stared at her dessert plate the night the agreement first appeared, and how I had told myself that meant she was on my side. I thought about my father, who had bought his house, a modest ranch in Worthington, by himself at 32, no co-tenants, no trustees, no one deciding what was demonstrated need. He had painted it himself, fixed the gutters himself, raised me in it by himself after my mother passed, and handed me the spare key the day I graduated college. It's not a big house, he had said, but nobody can take it from you. I made some calls. The first was to a real estate attorney. The second was to my own title company contact, a guy I had been referred to by a colleague who said he was thorough and discreet. The third was to my savings bank. By the time Thursday came, I had a plan. It was not a complicated plan. It was simply a plan built on the understanding that I would not be signing anything I had not written or approved, and that if the people across the table had something different in mind, they were going to have to say so out loud, in front of a notary, in daylight. I want to describe the closing table for you because the geography of it matters. The title company's conference room was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Columbus. It had a long table, 8 chairs, a window that looked out over the street. My real estate attorney, Sandra, sat to my left. Diane sat to my right. Gerald and Patricia were directly across from me, their attorney, and yes, they had brought their own attorney, which I had been told nothing about, which should tell you everything, sat beside Gerald. The notary sat at the head of the table with the documents in a neat stack. It started normally. The notary introduced herself. She went through the standard disclosures. She began working through the document stack. And then we reached the deed. Gerald cleared his throat. Before anyone signs anything, he said, we need to talk about how this property is going to be structured. He nodded to their attorney, who slid a set of stapled pages toward me. I didn't touch them. We've made some adjustments to the title vesting, Gerald said, for tax purposes and long-term family asset protection. Patricia and I will be included as co-tenants. Standard arrangement for family-assisted purchases. I looked at him. I paid the down payment myself, I said, from my own savings account. You haven't contributed $1 to this purchase. We've contributed extensively to Diane's life and stability, which makes this a family matter. That's not how property law works, my attorney said pleasantly. It's how our family works, Patricia said. There it was, said out loud, in a notary's conference room, in front of witnesses. The quiet thing said plainly. I turned to Diane. This is the moment I keep returning to. This is the moment I want to describe carefully, because I want to be fair to her, even now. She was looking at the table. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her jaw was doing the tight thing. She was not surprised. She was not angry. She was not looking at me. Diane, I said, did you know this language was in the deed? She didn't answer for 4 seconds. I counted. My parents want what's best for us, she said. I nodded slowly. I looked at my attorney. She gave me the smallest possible nod. I picked up my pen. I signed my name on the line that said I was declining the deed as drafted and terminating the purchase agreement, which my attorney had prepared as a 1-page addendum that morning. I dated it. I handed it to the notary. Gerald's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. His attorney leaned over and they had a quick, whispered conversation. What is this? Gerald said. It wasn't a question. I'm not purchasing a property that lists you as co-tenant, I said. I'm not signing any financial instrument you have a claim to, and I'm not continuing with a closing that was prepared in bad faith. This is completely unreasonable, Patricia said. Diane, tell him Patricia, I said, and my voice was very calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. This is between Diane and me. I looked at my wife again. She was looking at her hands. I stood up. I thanked the notary. I shook Sandra's hand. I stood up. I thanked the notary. I shook Sandra's hand. I walked to the elevator. My father was waiting in the lobby. I had asked him to be there in case. He took one look at my face and didn't ask any questions. He just said, "Come on, I'll buy you lunch." We went to a diner 3 blocks away. I had coffee and a BLT I didn't particularly taste. My father had pie. He let me sit quietly for a while before he said anything. "So," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You feel like you made the right call?" I thought about Diane's hands folded in her lap. I thought about the courtyard and the phone call. I thought about 6 months of negotiations that were never negotiations. I thought about the word workable. I feel like I made the only call, I said. He cut his pie in half and put one piece on my plate. That's usually the same thing, he said. The next 3 months were the hardest of my adult life, and I want to tell you that honestly, because I think stories like this sometimes flatten that part. The part where you have made the right decision and it still costs you something real. Diane and I had a lot of conversations in those weeks. Some of them were good. She said things that were true. That her family had conditioned her from childhood to see their control as protection. That she had genuinely believed she was working toward a compromise. That she loved me and hadn't wanted any of this. I believed most of it. I believed she believed all of it. But believing something doesn't make it true, and loving someone doesn't mean they're able to choose you when the moment comes. The marriage did not survive. I won't drag you through the details because they're not the point. The point is that it ended with more honesty than it had contained for most of its final year. And that is something. I kept working. I kept saving. 8 months after the closing table, I found another house. 2-bedroom, in a quieter part of Guyana, smaller backyard but better bones. I went through my own title company. My attorney reviewed every document before I initialed anything. The deed had one name on it. Mine. I signed it on a Thursday afternoon. The notary handed me the keys and said congratulations. I said thank you and meant it. I called my father from the driveway. Got the keys, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the television in the background. He always has the news on at that hour. One name on the deed, he said. One name on the deed, I said. Good, he said. And then, go paint something. Make it yours. Gerald's contracting firm, from what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, has been having a difficult couple of years. A few large contracts fell through. There was some issue with a bonding requirement. The Dublin house is apparently on the market. I don't feel satisfied about that. I want to be clear about that. It's not satisfaction. It's more like the quiet that comes when a sound you had stopped noticing finally stops. I think about that first Sunday dinner sometimes. The way Gerald said workable, and I thought it was about me. About whether I was good enough, successful enough, worth something. It was never about that. It was about whether I could be managed. Whether the structure of my life could be absorbed into the structure of theirs. The answer was no. It has always been no. And the day I said it out loud in a title company conference room in downtown Columbus in front of a notary and a set of documents I refused to sign, that was the day I stopped being a material and started being a person again. My house is quiet in the mornings. I make coffee in a kitchen I chose. I sit at a table I bought myself. Out the back window, the yard gets afternoon sun, just like I wanted. And there's a spot along the fence where I'm going to plant something in the spring. I haven't decided what yet. I'm taking my time. There's no one to approve it but me. If you've watched this far, I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. Is there something in your life, a relationship, an arrangement, a situation, where you've been accepting control dressed up as protection, where someone has been calling their management of you a form of care? It doesn't always look like a family financial agreement on a dinner table. Sometimes it looks like small decisions made for you. Sometimes it looks like someone answering questions you were supposed to answer yourself. You know the difference. You've always known. The question is just whether you're ready to say it out loud. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever been in a situation like this? How did you handle it? And if you haven't yet, what's stopping you? If this story meant something to you, hit the like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Revenge with Facts. We're here every week with stories about the moments people finally decided their dignity was non-negotiable. I'll see you in the next one.